The signal came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon, and it changed everything for humanity forever. Every screen across human space flickered and died before showing something that should not have been possible. Jacob Miller was standing in the command center of the Earth Defense Station when the walls themselves began to glow with strange colors that hurt to look at directly. He had been a commander for 12 years and had seen many things in space, but
nothing like this creature that appeared before.
Him and millions of others across every human world and station and ship in existence, the thing that called itself Overseer Kralith, looked wrong in ways that made the human brain struggle to process what the eyes were seeing. It had too many limbs that moved in directions that geometry should not allow, and its skin shifted between colors that did not exist in nature, and its eyes held something cold and ancient and completely without mercy or kindness or any emotion that humans would recognize as familiar. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, like 1,000 voices speaking in perfect but horrible harmony. The creature announced that it represented something called the Virinthi Collective, and that humanity had been selected for what it called a great honor. Jacob felt his stomach drop as the alien continued speaking in that terrible chorus of voices that made his teeth ache. The Virinthi had decided that humans were entertaining enough to broadcast across 700 different alien worlds as content for something they called the Galactic Entertainment Network. Every war that humans fought and every struggle they endured and every death they suffered would now be filmed and edited and sold as entertainment for aliens who would watch and laugh and place bets on how long humanity would last before going extinct. On Earth, in her small apartment in New York City, a woman named Lisa Grant stood, frozen with her coffee cup halfway to her lips as she watched the same broadcast. She was a captain in the Earth Defense Force and had trained for many scenarios, but not this one. Around the planet and across the colonies, billions of humans stopped what they were doing and stared at their screens in growing horror as the alien explained what was going to happen to them. Kralith seemed pleased with himself as he continued his announcement. He said that only 12 species in all of galactic history had been interesting enough for unrestricted broadcasting rights. He said that humans were perfect for entertainment because they were violent and emotional and unstable in ways that more civilized species had evolved beyond. The broadcast then showed footage of human soldiers dying in wars and families, crying over destroyed homes and children starving in famines, but the footage had been edited with dramatic music and alien voices, providing commentary like sports announcers describing a game. The Virinthi had already sold the broadcasting rights to human conflicts and suffering to entertainment networks across the galaxy. Betting pools had been established where aliens could wager on when humanity would collapse completely. The current odds favored total extinction within 3 years. Kralith said that the Virinthi looked forward to providing quality entertainment and thanked humanity for their cooperation, even though no human had been asked if they agreed to any of this. Then the signal cut out as suddenly as it had appeared and every screen returned to normal. The silence that followed was worse than the broadcast itself. Jacob stood in the command center surrounded by his crew, and nobody spoke for almost a minute. Then Lieutenant Amy Walsh broke the silence by whispering that aliens thought humans were just a show to watch and bet on. Her voice shook with anger and fear and something darker that Jacob recognized because he felt it too. Across human space, the reaction was immediate and unified in a way that humanity had never been unified before. Admiral Kevin Blake was in command of Earth's orbital defense network, and he immediately began pulling up every piece of information that humans had ever gathered about alien civilizations. He started connecting pieces that had never made sense before. The galaxy was full of peaceful species who never fought wars and never competed aggressively and seemed content to just exist without pushing forward or striving for anything beyond comfortable stagnation. Jacob started doing the same analysis from his station and reached the same conclusion. Every alien species that humans had ever encountered had been domesticated somehow. War and aggression and competition had been bred out of them thousands of years ago, through genetic engineering or social conditioning or some combination of both. They had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival because they had never needed to fight. Their worlds were rich in resources and their societies were stable and peaceful and completely unprepared for anything that might threaten them. But humanity was different. Humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them constantly. They had survived ice ages and droughts and plagues and predators and had learned to hunt and fight and work together to overcome threats that should have destroyed them. Violence was part of human nature not because they were evil, but because it had been necessary for survival. And unlike the aliens, humanity had never forgotten how to fight. Admiral Blake sent out a priority message to every military commander and government leader who had the authority to make decisions. The message was simple and direct. The aliens had made humanity into entertainment, and now humanity needed to decide how to respond. Within hours, the most powerful humans in existence were gathering for an emergency meeting that would determine the future of the species. Helen Pierce was the chief science advisor to the Secretary General, and she was already working on plans before the meeting even started. If the aliens wanted a show, then humanity would give them a show, but not the kind they expected. She understood that the galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that because humanity was less advanced technologically, that humans were also less dangerous. They were about to learn that technology and danger were not the same thing. The meeting was scheduled for dawn at a secure location deep underground. Every nation sent representatives, and every corporation with resources offered to help, and every military force prepared to coordinate in ways that had never happened before in human history. The message went out to all of them with a simple statement that captured what everyone was feeling. They had made humanity into a show, and now humanity would give them a finale they would never forget. Jacob looked at the star charts showing Varanthe space and felt something cold settle in his chest. The aliens thought they were watching primitives who would eventually destroy themselves. They had no idea that they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. Humanity was about to teach the galaxy a lesson about what happens when you make entertainment out of someone's suffering. They were going to learn that some species should never be pushed into a corner, and they were going to learn it the hard way. 3 months had passed since the broadcast, and humanity had changed in ways that the watching aliens could not understand. The Varanthe and their audience thought they were witnessing the beginning of human collapse, but they were actually watching something far more dangerous. Ryan Foster was a lieutenant colonel now working in a facility that had been built 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains in record time. The War Planning Center was filled with holographic displays showing ship designs and weapon systems and intelligence reports on every alien civilization that humans could gather information about. Claire Stevens was a doctor of xenobiology, and she stood in front of a massive 3-dimensional map of known space explaining something that most humans had already figured out. The aliens did not think like humans at all. Every species in the Galactic Council had evolved on worlds that were rich in resources and comfortable in climate. They had never needed to fight for survival because survival had never been difficult for them. This meant they were not just peaceful, but actually incompetent at violence in ways that humans found hard to believe. General Paul Henderson leaned forward and asked if that meant the aliens were soft. Claire shook her head and said it was worse than that. The alien security forces were ceremonial and existed mainly for show. Their weapons were designed for precision and efficiency, but not for mass destruction because they had never needed to kill on a large scale. Their entire civilization had forgotten what real violence looked like, and they had no idea how to defend against a species that remembered. Ryan pulled up video feeds from deep space monitoring stations that showed alien ships conducting what they thought was surveillance on human activity. The ships were beautiful in their design with elegant curves and artistic details, but they had almost no armor plating. They were designed to look impressive rather than to survive combat. The aliens were still broadcasting everything they saw back to their networks and treating human military preparations as amusing content for their entertainment shows. Michelle Carter was the director of the newly formed Human Coordination Council, and she said that this was exactly what humanity wanted. Let the aliens watch and let them think that humans were panicking and fragmenting and doing exactly what the betting pools predicted. But the truth was that humanity was more united than it had ever been in its entire history. Every nation had contributed their best scientists and engineers and military strategists to a single goal. Daniel Wright was overseeing the construction of the first real warship that humanity had ever built. Everything humans had made before were patrol craft and defense platforms designed to deal with asteroids and pirates. This new ship was different. It was designed from the ground up to kill on an interstellar scale, and nothing about it was meant to look pretty or impressive. The hull was made of matte black composite material that absorbed sensor waves instead of reflecting them. The engines could accelerate at speeds that would turn an alien crew into paste against their ship walls. The weapons ranged from relativistic kinetic kill vehicles that could punch through a planet to directed energy systems that could boil away armor in seconds. Michelle asked how long until the fleet would be ready for combat. Daniel said that the first battle group would be complete in 6 months and full deployment would take 18 months. But there was a problem that needed to be solved before any attack could happen. The Varanthi Collective controlled the hyperspace beacon network that made faster-than-light travel possible. Every route that humans knew about went through checkpoints controlled by the aliens. If humanity wanted to hit the Varanthi by surprise, they would need to either capture those beacons or find a way to travel without using them. Nathan Gray was humanity's best physicist, working on exotic theories, and he smiled when he explained the solution his team had found. The aliens used a specific frequency to stabilize their hyperspace corridors and make them safe for travel. Humans had discovered that they could create unstable short-duration corridors that did not need the alien beacons at all. General Henderson asked what unstable meant, and Nathan admitted that the transition would be rough and the exit point would be less precise than normal travel. But humans did not need precision for what they were planning. They needed surprise and shock and overwhelming force applied before the enemy knew what was happening. While the military prepared for war, the civilian scientists were doing equally important work. Susan Moore led a team that was reverse engineering every piece of alien technology that humanity had ever acquired through trade. The aliens had been happy to sell their older devices to primitive humans because they assumed humans would never understand the principles behind how they worked. That assumption was proving to be a fatal mistake. Susan explained that Varanthi ships were controlled by distributed artificial intelligence networks that were sophisticated but followed predictable logic patterns. Human programmers had created an electronic warfare suite that could insert cascade failures into the alien decision-making systems. When the attack came, the alien ships would be fighting against their own computers and would be unable to coordinate any kind of effective defense across human-controlled space. The preparation continued at a pace that would have been impossible before the broadcast united humanity. Miners on the lunar surface worked around the clock extracting raw materials. Shipyards in orbit around Mars ran triple shifts building hull sections and weapon systems. The colony on Europa had converted its entire industrial infrastructure to military production. And all of this activity was being broadcast to the galaxy. The aliens watched humans scrambling and building and preparing. Their commentators made jokes about primitive species and their obsession with weapons. The betting pool shifted slightly, with some aliens wagering that humans might last an extra year before they turned their weapons on each other and destroyed themselves. Overseer Kralith gave an interview to a major galactic entertainment network and said that watching humans build weapons was adorable, like watching children play with toys. He said that when humans inevitably use those weapons to fight each other, the ratings would be spectacular. The interviewer agreed, and they both laughed about how entertaining the human extinction was going to be. But far from any alien sensors, Lisa Grant was commanding a stealth reconnaissance mission deep into Varanthi territory. Her ship was invisible to their primitive detection systems, and she was carefully mapping every military installation and industrial center and communication hub in their space. She reported back that the Varanthi had no defense in depth at all. Their entire military doctrine was built around peacekeeping and policing civilians. They had never conceived of an enemy that wanted to destroy rather than conquer. Admiral Blake received her reports and said that humanity would teach them. The preparation phase was almost complete. Humanity had built a war machine in secret, while hiding it behind the chaos that the aliens expected to see. Every ship and every weapon and every soldier was part of a plan that had a single goal. The galaxy was going to regret ever pointing a camera at human suffering, and humanity was going to make sure that regret echoed across the stars for generations. The attack began without any warning or declaration or mercy, and the Varanthi border station called Observation Post Sigma 7 was broadcasting its nightly entertainment schedule when sensors detected something impossible. Ships were appearing from hyperspace, but not from any known corridor or beacon. Station Commander Velix had exactly 3 seconds to understand what he was seeing before the relativistic kill vehicle struck, and the station simply stopped existing. The kinetic energy released was equal to a small nuclear weapon, and 3,000 alien observers and administrators died instantly without ever knowing what killed them. Across Varanthi territory, 57 installations were destroyed in the first 60 seconds of the war. Every target had been carefully chosen from the reconnaissance data that Lisa Grant had gathered. Communications hubs and broadcast stations and military coordination centers all vanished in precisely timed strikes. Humanity attacked like a surgeon using a hammer, and the aliens had no idea what was happening to them. Admiral Kevin Blake watched from the bridge of a ship called Retribution, and the name had been chosen very deliberately. Around him, his crew worked with cold efficiency, managing weapon systems that were designed to overwhelm any defense rather than to fight fairly. Lieutenant Amy Walsh reported that all strike groups had successfully inserted into enemy space and that the alien communication network was experiencing cascade failures exactly as planned. Blake ordered Phase 2 to begin, and across 3 star systems, human ships started broadcasting on every frequency that existed, but they were not sending messages asking for peace or trying to negotiate. They were sending something far more terrifying than threats. They were sending education. Jacob Miller's voice echoed across every galactic communication network with a simple message. Humanity had been observed for entertainment, and aliens had wagered on human deaths and profited from human suffering. Now humanity was going to educate the galaxy on what humans did to those who preyed upon them. The footage that followed was clinical and horrifying and meticulously documented. Human ships were systematically dismantling Varanthi defensive positions. Alien vessels that were beautiful and elegant were being torn apart by weapons they had no context to understand. Human Marines were boarding stations and securing them while broadcasting every moment. But humanity was not committing atrocities or killing civilians or behaving like monsters. Every civilian facility was evacuated before destruction. Every alien crew was given one chance to surrender. Those who surrendered were treated with professional courtesy and processed as prisoners of war and kept completely safe from harm. This was not genocide or revenge killing. This was a lesson being taught to the entire galaxy. Paul Henderson commanded the ground assault on a Varanthi administrative world called Keltor 9. His forces landed with overwhelming shock and awe, but their targets were carefully chosen. Government buildings and military installations and broadcast centers were secured, while civilian areas were left untouched. Henderson ordered his troops to secure the central entertainment complex because he wanted every alien who had been watching humans to understand what they were seeing now. The entertainment complex was massive and capable of broadcasting to 700 worlds at the same time. Human combat engineers took it intact in under an hour. The Varanthi administrators inside were unharmed, but terrified because they could not comprehend creatures that moved with such violent purpose and efficiency. They had never seen anything like human soldiers who worked together like parts of a single machine. Claire Stevens arrived with the second wave, leading a team of communication specialists and psychologists. While the military secured the facility, her team began the real work of reprogramming the broadcast network. She announced that they were going live in 5 minutes and that every world that had been watching humans suffer was about to get an education in consequences. The broadcast went active across known space. Instead of the entertainment content that the galaxy expected, they saw something that shook their civilizations to the core. Helen Pierce appeared on screens across 700 worlds. Behind her, footage played showing human history, but not the wars and violence that aliens had been broadcasting. Instead, it showed the context. The struggles for freedom and the fights against oppression, and the countless times humans had risen from disaster and rebuilt their civilization stronger than before. Helen spoke calmly and said that the aliens had made entertainment from humanity's darkest moments, but had never asked why humans fought. They had never wondered what drove humans or what made them different. They had simply assumed humans were violent primitives who were good for ratings and betting pools. The footage shifted to show alien civilizations that were peaceful and stagnant and content. Worlds that had achieved peace by breeding out aggression through genetic modification and social conditioning. Species that had forgotten what it meant to struggle for survival. Helen continued and said that humans were not like them. Humans carried the legacy of millions of years of evolution on a world that had tried to kill them at every turn. They had evolved as persistence hunters and strategic thinkers and social creatures capable of coordinating violence on a scale the galaxy had forgotten was possible. The aliens had thought they were watching primitives, but they were actually watching the most dangerous species in known space. On Keltor 9, Ryan Foster stood in what had been Overseer Kralith's personal broadcasting studio. The Varanthi leader was restrained but unharmed and forced to watch as his empire crumbled around him. Ryan said quietly that Kralith had thought humans were the show, but he was wrong. The aliens were never the audience. They were always the lesson that humanity was teaching to the galaxy. The military operation continued with mechanical precision. Humanity had spent months planning every detail and wargaming every scenario. The Varanthi military was designed for peacekeeping and ceremonies and had no idea how to fight a real war. Their ships were too slow and their weapons were too precise and their tactics were too dependent on following rules and protocols. Human forces did not follow rules. They followed objectives and completed them with ruthless efficiency. Within 72 hours, the Varanthi collective had completely lost its ability to coordinate its territory. Human ships controlled every major hyperspace junction. The broadcast network that had once streamed human suffering was now streaming something else. Surrender terms. Admiral Blake appeared on every screen across Varanthi space. He announced that effective immediately, the Varanthi collective was disbanded. All Varanthi territory was now under human administration until reparations were complete and a new government was established. Any resistance would be met with overwhelming force. He paused to let that sink in before continuing. Blake said that the aliens had wanted to watch humanity and now they should keep watching. Watch as humans showed them what civilization actually meant. Watch as humans rebuilt what the Varanthi had profited from destroying. Watch as humans ensured that no species would ever make the mistake of treating sentient suffering as entertainment again. The first strike was complete. Humanity had gone from observed primitives to the dominant military power in known space in less than 1 week. But this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something much larger. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session on the neutral world of Paraxis 7, and for the first time in 3,000 years, they were discussing war. 700 species representatives gathered in a vast chamber that was designed to symbolize unity and peace. Nathan Cole stood at the human delegation podium looking out at a sea of alien faces that ranged from confused to terrified. Behind him, a full company of human Marines stood at attention not as a threat, but as a reminder that everything had changed. Forever. Nathan began by thanking the Council for inviting humanity to explain recent actions, but he made it clear that humans were not there to apologize. A wave of shocked reactions rippled through the chamber. The Council speaker was a crystalline entity named Solvarix who chimed with distress and said that humanity had committed acts of war against a Council-recognized civilization and had violated multiple accords and treaties. Nathan interrupted and said that the accords did not apply because they assumed all parties were acting in good faith. The Varanthi collective had been broadcasting human suffering as entertainment and profiting from human deaths. He asked the speaker to tell him which accord covered that specific situation. There was silence because no one had an answer. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, no one had ever weaponized entertainment the way the Varanthi had done. And no one had ever responded the way humanity did. Susan Moore stepped forward and activated holographic displays that showed data from the Galactic Entertainment Network. The displays showed viewer metrics and betting pools and advertising revenue. Humanity's suffering had been extremely profitable, and dozens of species had made money from the broadcasts. She explained that they had spent the last week analyzing everything they could find in Varanthi databases, and what they found was disturbing beyond measure. The UAM displays showed that 12 species had been designated Category 5 over the past 6,000 years. Of those 12 species, 11 had gone extinct. The official council records listed their extinctions as natural societal collapse, but the real records that Susan's team found in Varanthi databases told a different story. The hologram shifted to show alien faces of species that humanity had never encountered before. These civilizations had been subjected to the same treatment that humans received. Constant observation and editing of their worst moments and galactic audiences betting on their extinction. When the pressure of being watched and judged and laughed at became too much, and these species did collapse, the broadcasts continued until the very end. Daniel Wright added his analysis and explained that the Varanthi did not just observe decline, they actively engineered it. They would provide technology and resources to whichever factions in a society were most likely to create conflict. They manipulated entire civilizations to maximize entertainment value and ratings. The chamber erupted in denial and outrage and demands for proof. Nathan let them shout for a moment, then activated the final piece of evidence. Recordings from the Varanthi archives with Overseer Kralith and other administrators, discussing their manipulation methods in detail. Nathan said quietly that humanity was the 13th species the Varanthi tried to break. Humans were just the first one that broke the Varanthi instead. On Earth, Michelle Carter was coordinating humanity's next moves. The military operation had been the easy part. Now came the much harder challenge of managing an interstellar empire that humans had never wanted in the first place. Paul Henderson reported that they had 57 star systems under occupation. The local populations were mostly compliant and not hostile. They were confused but cooperative because they genuinely did not understand that what the Varanthi had been doing was wrong. Michelle said that was the real problem. How do you explain ethics to species that have engineered away their capacity for understanding cruelty? Lisa Grant had been thinking about that question since the fighting stopped. She said they did not need to explain. They needed to demonstrate. Humanity had to show the galaxy what accountability looked like through actions rather than words. The trials began 3 weeks after the first strike. Humanity had captured over 2,000 Varanthi administrators and producers and executives who were involved in the entertainment network. Each one was being processed through a justice system that combined human legal principles with galactic norms. Overseer Kralith stood in a courtroom facing a tribunal composed of human judges and representatives from affected species. His trial was broadcast across the galaxy, but not for entertainment. It was broadcast for education. Judge Margaret Shaw stated the charges against Kralith. He was accused of crimes against sentient civilization, including the systematic exploitation of suffering for profit and the manipulation of developing societies and contributing to the extinction of 11 species. She asked how he pleaded. Kralith's translator buzzed with confusion as he said these were not crimes. He claimed he was operating within council guidelines for observation of primitive species. Margaret countered that the guidelines allowed observation for scientific and diplomatic purposes. They did not permit exploitation or manipulation or profiteering. Kralith had turned sentient beings into products and sold their suffering for money. The trial lasted 3 weeks and evidence was presented with meticulous care. Communications and financial records and broadcast logs were all examined. The galaxy watched as humanity demonstrated something most of them had forgotten, which was justice that prioritized truth over convenience. Kralith was found guilty on all counts. His sentence was life imprisonment with mandatory work and restoration programs for the species his network had damaged. Hundreds of other Varanthi administrators received similar sentences. But humanity's reckoning was not just about punishment. Kevin Blake oversaw the establishment of a new framework for galactic interaction, built on principles the Council had forgotten. Blake announced the creation of the Sentient Protection Accords. Any civilization with advanced technology had an obligation to protect developing societies rather than exploit them. Observation for scientific purposes had to be transparent and consensual. Entertainment derived from suffering would be treated as a crime against civilization itself. The Council did not like these new rules. They argued about sovereignty and about the right of advanced species to study primitive ones and about economic disruption. Nathan Cole listened to their arguments, then stood and made something very clear. These were not suggestions or requests. Humanity now controlled the hyperspace beacon network and the Varanthi military infrastructure. Humans had the only true war fleet in known space. The Council could adopt these principles willingly, or humanity would enforce them. That was not a bluff or a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. Human ships were already deployed to key strategic points across the galaxy. Humanity had proven it could project military power anywhere in known space within days. The Council understood that resistance was pointless. They voted on the Sentient Protection Accords, and the measure passed 681 to 19. Helen Pierce addressed the galaxy one final time from the captured entertainment complex. She said that humanity had not wanted to become a galactic power. Humans had been content with their small corner of space. But the Varanthi forced their hand and made humans choose between accepting exploitation or fighting back. Humanity chose to fight, and now the galaxy would live with the consequences of that choice. 6 months after the first strike, Jacob Miller stood on the observation deck of Gateway Station, which was humanity's new hub for coordinating galactic affairs. Beyond the transparent viewport, Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species moved through carefully managed traffic patterns. Some were trading vessels, and some were diplomatic missions, and some were the first attempts by council species to build their own defense forces. Everything had changed, and humanity was at the center of all of it. Lisa Grant joined him at the viewport, and she had been promoted to Director of Interspecies Coordination, which was a job that did not exist 2 months ago. She said it was strange that humans had spent their entire history fighting each other, and now they were teaching the galaxy how to defend itself. Jacob agreed and said the council species were terrified of humanity. Lisa said they should be terrified because humanity had proven that everything they believed about peaceful coexistence was built on a foundation of ignorance. Violence had not disappeared from the galaxy. The aliens had simply bred it out of themselves and assumed that made them civilized. The re-education of galactic civilization was humanity's most ambitious project. On 100 worlds, human advisors were working with alien governments to re-establish concepts that had been forgotten for millennia. Deterrence and strategic defense and proportional response were ideas that had to be taught from scratch. The galaxy had to remember how to protect itself without becoming predatory. It was a delicate balance, and sometimes humanity made mistakes in the teaching process. Claire Stevens managed the largest operation, which was the rehabilitation of Varanthi worlds. The civilian population had been genuinely shocked by revelations about their leadership. Most Varanthi had believed the entertainment they consumed was voluntarily provided. They thought the primitive species actually enjoyed being broadcast. Teaching them the truth was difficult and painful. Claire admitted during coordination meetings that teaching empathy to a species that had engineered it away was harder than fighting a war. Progress was being made, but it would take 3 generations minimum before Varanthi culture fully transformed. Paul Henderson oversaw the gradual drawdown of human military forces in occupied territories. He reminded his officers regularly that humans were not conquerors. Their job was to stabilize and educate and leave. The moment they started thinking of occupied space as a human empire was the moment they became what they had fought against. But leaving was not simple. 17 worlds had formally requested that human forces remain as security guarantors. The vacuum left by Varanthi collapse had created instability, and many species did not yet have the capability to defend themselves. Kevin Blake wrestled with strategic implications of long-term occupation. If humans stayed, they were occupiers. If they left, these systems might fall into chaos. There was no perfect answer to this dilemma. Daniel Wright, who now headed the Galactic Defense Initiative, suggested they build the capacity for alien species to defend themselves. Training and equipment and doctrine could make humanity obsolete in occupied territories. That was the goal. Training programs began in earnest with human military advisors deploying to 57 worlds. They taught alien security forces the basics of strategic defense. It was strange watching species that had been peaceful for millennia learning to operate weapons and coordinate tactical responses. Some species took to military training naturally. The Kelthrani were silicon-based beings with distributed consciousness, who proved exceptional at strategic coordination. The Morpheans were shapeshifters who had been bred for diplomacy, but discovered an aptitude for special operations that surprised everyone. Other species struggled with military concepts. The crystalline prismatics had difficulty with the idea of decisive action. The gaseous Forellians could not understand why violence was sometimes necessary to prevent greater violence. Human trainers had to be patient and creative in their teaching methods. On Earth, Michelle Carter faced a different challenge, which was keeping humanity from becoming what it had defeated. The easy victory over the Varanthi and the rapid establishment of galactic dominance had gone to some people's heads. She reported to the Human Coordination Council that 18 nations were protesting current policies. They wanted humanity to leverage its position more aggressively. They demanded technology transfers and trade concessions and territorial gains. Nathan Cole said flatly that these protesters wanted humanity to be imperialists. Some people saw an opportunity and thought humans should take advantage of it. Kevin Blake said they needed to remind everyone why humanity had fought in the first place. The war was not about becoming conquerors. It was about stopping themselves from being victims. The council made a decision to rotate all military personnel back to human space after 6-month deployments. No permanent occupation forces and no colonial administrations and no human governors ruling alien worlds. It made operations harder, but it kept humanity honest about its intentions. Ryan Foster commanded the last occupation force on Keltor 9, and he oversaw the transfer of authority to the new Varanthi provisional government. The aliens were nervous and unsure if they could maintain order without human support. Ryan assured them they could manage. Humans had trained their security forces and helped establish democratic institutions. They had everything they needed except confidence, and that was something they would have to find for themselves. As his forces withdrew, Ryan wondered if they were leaving too soon, but he remembered what Henderson had said. The moment humans started thinking they knew better than aliens how to run their societies was the moment they became colonizers. Susan Moore made a different contribution to the new galactic order. Her team had reverse-engineered most alien technology, and now humanity had a choice. They could keep the technological advantage or share it. Some argued that sharing would lose humanity's military edge. Others countered that not sharing would prove humans were just another power-hoarding advantages over others. The compromise was elegant. Humanity would share defensive technology freely, but weapons technology required strict oversight and adherence to the Sentient Protection Accords. Any species that violated the accords would lose access to human military support and technology. It created a system where cooperation was rewarded and exploitation was punished. The Galactic Council's structure changed too. Humanity pushed for rotating leadership instead of permanent seats. Transparency in decision-making and enforcement mechanisms that actually worked were implemented. Many species resisted because they were comfortable with the old ways. Nathan Cole reminded them that the old ways had led to 11 extinctions and nearly a 12th. Change or become irrelevant were the only options. Available 1 year after the broadcast that changed everything, Jacob Miller found himself back on Earth, visiting a memorial that had been constructed in New York. It honored not just human victims, but all 12 species that had been exploited by the entertainment network. Names were carved in stone with human names alongside alien designations that required xenolinguists to properly pronounce. They were united in victimhood and separated by time but remembered together. Lisa Grant stood beside him and asked if it was worth it. All the fighting and all the changes humanity had forced on the galaxy, had they made things better? Jacob thought about Varanthi children being taught empathy in schools. He thought about council species building defense forces for the first time in millennia. He thought about 11 extinct civilizations that would never know justice but were at least remembered now. He said to ask him in 100 years. Right now humanity had just stopped the bleeding. Building something better would take much longer. But humanity was building. The show was over and the real work was just beginning.